Welcome back, friends. Another week of tournaments is done in the books, and I got all the data here for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Just a quick reminder before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you liked the video, don't forget to the like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest videos. And if you're looking for other ways to help support the channel, I have created a Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link is in the description below. Pop on over, take a look, and any help is greatly appreciated. All right, guys, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to look at is the player numbers for the previous week. Last week was actually a very big week. It was like the biggest one since LVO, I think, and had just under 1,500 players. And for the Dataslate, we're sitting at just under 9,200 players. Games played last week was just under 7,400, and for the Dataslate, we're sitting at just about 46,000. And we had 16 tournaments last week, bringing the Dataslate total up to 158. All right, and the first chart we're going to look at this week is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. Just a quick reminder, the Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%, so anything within that range will be in green. Anything above 5% above or below will be in orange. Anything outside of that is in red. So coming in at number one last week was Death Guard with 58%, Imperial Knights at 57%, then we had Drukhari at 56%, Thousand Sons at 54%, and Necrons at 53%. And down at the bottom, we had Imperial Agents at 36%, Dark Angels at 39%, Black Templars at 40%, and then we had a four-way tie with Admech, Blood Angels, Orcs, and Tau all at 44%. And thanks to one of the helpful suggestions in the YouTube comments from Oninada, sorry if I got the name wrong, is adding a indicator to show if the armies increased or decreased from last week. So I've added these arrows to the side there. So green is obviously went up, red went down, and the black dash means they stayed the same from the previous week. So let me know what you guys think. If there's anything that can be improved upon it, and maybe it'll make it a little easier to read. I'm still playing with the format. So if you have any other suggestions or any other comments to help improve it, I'm always open to hear that. I'm always trying to make this stuff better for you guys. So just let me know. So Death Guard, they continue rolling with their strong start with the new codex, 58%. It was been about as good as everyone thought it was going to be, and they've been having some pretty successful weeks early on here. Imperial Knights is surprisingly keeping pace with Death Guard, a 57% win rate last week. And then Drukhari had a 56% win rate, and I do know that Skari was in the tournament scene last week. I heard a lot of chatter about it, so definitely had something to do with it there. Emperor's Children, they're kind of settling right into the middle of the meta there at about 51% the last couple weeks, which is actually good to see. You don't want a codex to come out and be too good like Death Guard, because that's going to get nerfs and it's going to like upset people and it's not going to be really fun. But being right in the middle of the pack, maybe a little bit above average, that's not too bad. It's going to keep that codex creep down, so that's good to see. Now you have the other side of things. World Eaters down at the bottom, they had a 46% win rate. They actually went down this week. Not exactly what you want to see from new codex. You don't want your codex to start performing worse than the index or right around the same as the index after you've been playing with just the same one or two detachments for almost 2 years. You'd like to see a little bit of a bump to bring you back up closer to 50%. So that's a little bit of a letdown so far with World Eaters, but maybe with the new data slate that is coming, we can see some changes there. And then you have down at the bottom, you have Tau, Orcs, Blood Angels, and Admech all at 44%. Blood Angels and Admech have been down there for most of the time. Same as Black Templars and Dark Angels. Those are like the four that have sort of been living at the bottom with Tau. Orcs has slowly been dropping down after the nerfs, so they're kind of settling in there. So they might be in line for some changes in the data slate in the other direction, but we'll see if it's a little too late for that, and they might have to, unfortunately, wait for the next one. And overall, I mean, this week didn't look too bad. We had a couple armies at the top doing really good. Death Guard, Imperial Knights, and Drukhari. Kind of surprising to see Drukhari up there, but Imperial Knights have been doing really well this entire data slate, and Death Guard obviously has a really good new codex, so that's not surprising. Thousand Sons continue to do decent in the win percentage, just can't pull in any tournament wins really. They're having some success and they have a new codex coming, so curious to see how that continues moving forward. Aeldari always doing good, right around 50 or above. Overall, I think it was a pretty good week. There was a few outliers more than normal, but that is bound to happen when there's going to be multiple codexes released in a short period of time. So we're going to see a lot of fluctuation, I think, in the next couple months until everything sort of settles down, especially with the new data slate coming out. So we're looking forward to that, and hopefully that can help rein some things in and boost some stuff up that might need some help. So next up is the army representation. This is a percentage of the player base for each army. So if everyone was even, it would all be about 3.6, 3.7%. So if you're above that, that means you have more tthan the average amount of players. And if you have less, then you have less than the average amount of players. So at the top, we had Death Guard at 8.4% this week, and then Aeldari at 7.1%, Space Marines 7.1%, Necrons at 6.4%, and Custodies at 5.9%. At the bottom, we have Agents at 0.2, Templars at 1, Deathwatch at 1.5, and then we have a three-way tie with Sisters, Space Wolves, and Thousand Suns all at 1.5%. So Death Guard in the back of the first week of the huge success and all the hype in the Codex, they actually have the highest representation in the meta. I think this is the first time I've ever seen Death Guard come out on top, and by a wide margin too, almost 1.5%. So there's definitely a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon. We'll see how long that lasts for, but right for now, they are almost 1 in every 10 players is playing Death Guard. And then we have Aeldari, Space Marines, Necrons, and Custodes. They've all been up there in any variation of that order. Custodes had been number 1, but they've been slowly falling off as the new codexes come out. Interesting enough, World Leaders is there at 5.1%, so they're actually like 6th highest, even though the results are really poor. We'll see if that continues based on the win percentage and people's general feelings about the codex. We'll see if that drops back down, but for now, everyone wants to try their new army and their new detachment, so they're getting a lot of play. And even though Thousand Suns had a good week and Space Wolves has been pretty good, the representation is very low at 1.5%. I think people are just bored of the armies. You know, they're playing the same 2 detachments forever. So with the new codexes on the horizon, we should see a bump back up for them in the next couple months here once it finally gets released. Overall, I think it's pretty indicative of how this chart looks pretty much every week. You've got 5 or 6 at the top doing all the work, 5 or 6 at the bottom doing nothing, and then you've got a group in the middle sort of keeping everything stable. So I don't think it's going to change too much. Maybe we might see a little bit of a shift because some of these armies at the bottom still don't have codexes, like Drukhari, Thousand Suns, Space Wolves, Black Templars. They might get a little bit of a boost, but I don't think it's going to pull too many of them back up into the averages and bring everyone from the top down. So overall, it's kind of what we expected. All right, now we have the combined stats for previous weeks. So we have win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of the players who only lost 1 game or didn't lose any games at a tournament. So they went 5-0 or 4-1. It's not a perfect stat, but it's a good way to measure sort of the success of an army. You know, if you go to a tournament, you do go 5-0, you might not win, but you still go 5-0 or 4-1. Now that depends on when you get your wins and when you get your loss. But overall, it shows that you had a pretty successful tournament, and I would go home feeling good about if I went 4-1. So at the top there, we have Death Guard at 58% win rate. They have 26.7% XOX1 and 8.4% rep, so they are comfortably in the lead due to their heightened numbers. And then we have Necrons in number 2, Imperial Knights number 3, Drukhari at 4, and Aeldari at 5. Down at the bottom, we have Dark Angels, then Templars, Tau, World Eaters, and Orcs. Death Guard, like I said, crazy good week. They are number 1 in all categories last week, win percentage, XOX1, and representation, so they're clearly going to be number 1 and by a wide margin. And then we have Necrons, Imperial Knights, Drukhari, and Aeldari. Necrons and Imperial Knights are pretty close to each other. They're kind of getting there a little bit different ways between the XOX1 and the win percentage, but they both had very good weeks with over 20% XOX1. And Drukhari, again, had almost 22% XOX1, so there's a very successful week from them. The only where they're lacking in is the representation. If it was up around 4%, they would be tied with Knights probably. Space Wolves on the sort of verge of their new codex. They had a pretty good week, 50% win rate. That's really good. XOX1 is about 18%, so that's also really good because the average should be around 16 or 17%. So they had a pretty good week, even despite their low representation numbers. Same as Thousand Suns. Kind of interesting that they're both in line for a codex and both sitting right around the same spot collectively in the meta, kind of getting their different ways, but they're both right there. Emperor's Children, they're setting into the middle of the meta, like I mentioned. They had 51% win rate. That's good. Their XOX1 is only 12%, so that was a little bit low. So not a lot of success at tournaments with them, but a lot of people going 2-3, 3-2 kind of thing, and a good healthy representation. And what you don't want to see down the bottom with the new codex that came out was a big flop with World Eaters, 46% win rate. They only have 7% XOX1 despite their 5% representation. So they had lots of players, but only 7%, only lost 1 game or didn't lose any games. That's not what you want to see. There's not a lot of people doing well with World Eaters getting to those end tables. They're pretty much, I would call them a mid-board army, but I think they're kind of like at the bottom boards there. Not what you want to see. I don't know if they're going to be in line for any changes in the upcoming Dataslate because it is coming up pretty soon, and I think they probably have that stuff sort of locked in a couple weeks ahead of time before they kind of get these results in. So there might be a balance patch put in the meantime in the coming weeks after, just to sort of fix some things if there continues to be issues. But right now it's not looking too good for World Eaters with the new codex. And then the usual suspects at the bottom, Tau, Black Templars, Dark Angels. Not surprising to see them all down there. They all got a below 10% XOX1 and a below 45% win rate. Overall, the chart looks pretty good. Everyone's kind of living in that middle range again, same as the representation. You got like 4 armies at the top doing all the work, and then you got 3 or 4 armies at the bottom kind of struggling. Like I mentioned, on the verge of this new Dataslate coming out, hopefully we can see some changes and we can help bring those ones at the bottom up a little bit. All right, and we're going to move on to the tournament wins for each army last week. So last week, Aeldari had 3 wins. Tyranids had 2. Space Marines had 2. They actually won the Dallas Open that went into Monday, so I had to wait a little bit for those results to come in before I could update everything properly. Then we had Orcs, Necrons, Leagues of Votann, Imperial Knights, Amber's Children, Death Guard, Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Demons, and Astra Militarum. So lots of armies getting tournament wins this week, which is nice to see. So there's 16 tournaments and 12 different armies got wins, which is nice to see. Lots of spread there. Yeah, and not surprising to see Aeldari at the top. They've been doing really well. While their faction hasn't been dominating, they have that one sub-faction, Devoted of Ynnead, sort of doing all the work for them, and we'll get into that a little bit later when we do the faction focus. But overall, I think it was a pretty good week, getting a good spread of winners across multiple different armies. All right, now we're moving on to the tournament wins for each sub-faction. So this just breaks it down from the armies to the sub-factions so we can see how each army is getting their wins. So as I mentioned, Devoted of Ynnead for Aeldari, they got all 3 tournament wins. Gladius Task Force for Space Marines got 2 of the tournament wins, and then every other sub-faction just kind of got 1 each, so it was a nice spread for the week. Nothing really to mention other than that. All right, next thing we're going to move on to is the win percentage by armies for the current data slate. So this is for the last 10 weeks of data, and just a quick reminder, the acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%, so that will be in green. Anything above or below will be in orange. Anything way above and below will be in red. Still at number 1, Emperor's Children at almost 55%, Imperial Knights at 53%, Chaos Demons at 51%, Deathwatch at 50%, and Death Guard at 50 as well. Down at the bottom, we have Imperial Agents, 38, Tau at 42.6, Templars at 42.7, Dark Angels at 43.8, and Blood Angels at 44.2. So Emperor's Children remains on top. It's starting to even out a little bit now that they get some weeks of results in, and especially like last week, they were at 51%. So they're going to drop back down into the average, I think, in the next data slate once the numbers get reset for everybody. Death Guard creeping into the top 5 there after a couple really good weeks with the new codex. They're up to almost 51% win rate. I think if they had a few more weeks, they would climb up to number 2, or I don't think they get to number 1 just due to the number of results everyone has, but definitely a couple good weeks are bumping them up there. And then we have 4 armies at the bottom. Should hopefully see some nice changes next week with the data slate, or maybe in a couple weeks depending on when it comes out. You have Tau, Templars, Blood Angels, and Dark Angels have sort of been living down there at the bottom. I mean, Drukhari, they're down there, but they do have their weeks where they're up top, and they have their weeks where they're way down below. I know it's heavily dependent on who's playing them, but they do have some success here and there. But I know Tau and Black Templars have definitely been hurting the most. And Dark Angels, I know, are getting a new detachment coming out, so that should hopefully help them a little bit. And then Blood Angels probably just needs a few tweaks to sort of bump them back up. Overall, the current data slate doesn't look too bad. We have a lot of armies within that like healthy range. We only have like 6 below there, including agents. So overall, I think it's really not too bad. I think Games Workshop is doing an okay job of balancing the meta as a whole. I think there is some cases, on the edges that need a lot of work. And while they are getting much better at addressing things in a timely manner, I think things could be sped up a little bit for armies that really need the help. I'm looking at like last data slate, we had Sisters struggle the whole time. And then this time we have Tau really down at the bottom. We have Templars down at the bottom, Dark Angels. Like those armies could use some little minor adjustments here and there instead of waiting 3 months living in the dregs at the bottom. Overall, I think they're doing a good job of keeping everything within that acceptable range of 45 to 55%, where no one is running away and no one's falling off too much. There's definitely some clear winners and losers, but everything is looking pretty good overall, and it's hard to balance a game with 28 different armies, so I think it's pretty good. Next up is the army representation for the current data slate. So it's, again, 10 weeks of data. The average army representation is about 3.7%. So at the top, we have Aeldari with 7.1%, Space Marines at 7.1 as well, Custodians at 6.9, Demons at 6, and then Astra Militarum at 5.6. At the bottom, we have Imperial Agents at 0.3, Templars at 1, Deathwatch at 1.3, Thousand Sons at 1.5, Admech at 1.5, and then Sisters at 1.6. Not much has really changed in the 10-week results. It's pretty much been Aeldari, Space Marines, Custodians, and Demons all living at the top this entire data slate. And then down at the bottom, it's been Templars, Deathwatch, Thousand Sons, Admech, Sisters, Drukhari, all living at the bottom for the whole data slate. I think it's kind of indicative of 2 things. The good armies are at the top, obviously, and the sort of niche armies and the more difficult armies and the bad armies are at the bottom. So while some of the armies at the bottom, like Drukhari, Thousand Sons, Space Wolves, Black Templars, they still don't have codexes, and that will help breathe some life into them. It's not going to fix it and make everyone even. I think this is just going to be something we have to live with. So based on just the nature of the game, with 28 different armies, people's personal preferences on what they play, paint, and collect, it's such a personal hobby that we're never going to see a perfectly balanced army representation. But you would just like it to be a little bit more even, where maybe the top is only 6% and the bottom is only like 2%. That would just give a lot more life to those ones at the bottom and just pull from some of the ones at the top. And now that does come from like Aeldari with their Devoted of Ynnead doing a lot of work. And I mean, Space Marines are just always popular, same as Custodes. Demons have read really good rules this Dataslate in this edition, so they're up at the top. Guard are always popular, so you can kind of see how things are going to keep shaking out. It's just those fringe armies that, like, you know, they're not everyone's favorite. They need a little help. A good codex will definitely help that, but you don't want to break things just to breathe some life back into an army. So overall, I think this is what you should expect to see, so I'm not really too surprised, and I'm you know, overall, it's not too bad. So next up is the combined stats for the current Dataslate. This is, again, win rate, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So at the top, we have Imperial Knights with number 1, Orcs at number 2, Demons at number 3, and then we have Aeldari at 4 and Death Guard at 5. And down at the bottom, we have Agents, Templar, Tau, Dark Angels, and Blood Angels. So Imperial Knights to take over the top spot in the last week of the Dataslate, finally bumping out Orcs. They've had some really good weeks recently, really bumping that win rate up and that XOX1 percentage, and even their representation is actually kind of keeps climbing and climbing. So really popular army right now. It's really good for tournaments. You only have to travel with 10 models roughly. So, you know, especially if you're playing like Orcs, you don't have to take like 100 models. So it's definitely some incentive there for people to play them, and they're doing really good. So it's always positive and helping bring in the results. Not surprising to see the armies with the 3 new codexes kind of near the top. We have Aeldari, Death Guard, and Emperor's Children. They're all getting there slightly different ways. Aeldari's doing it more so through the XOX1 and the representation. They're a very popular army, lots of players. The win percentage is about average, but that's because you have people playing the sort of non-optimal Devoted of Ynnead. If everyone was playing that army specific, that detachment, specifically, I think the results would be even more skewed. But they have a lot of options and a lot of different unique ways to play. So, you know, there's always going to be people playing everything. Death Guard, it's only been a couple weeks, but the results are kind of speaking for themselves. They keep climbing each week with the new codex comes out. It's a very powerful codex so far, so that's definitely contributing to their standings. And Emperor's Children, again, new army, only a couple weeks results, so it's hard to say, but I think their numbers will actually climb down a little bit as things smooth out next Dataslate. But right now, they're sitting pretty good with almost 55% win rate and at almost 19% XOX1. So you have World Eaters, the other army with a new codex, kind of living at the bottom there. And you can see that while it's only been a couple weeks of results, it hasn't really given them a huge boon and bumped them up. They're still behind armies like Sisters of Battle and Thousand Sons, armies that are kind of struggling a little bit to get meaningful results, especially Thousand Sons, who have a good XOX1, but they have very little representation versus World Eaters, who have almost triple the representation. So there's definitely some work to be done there. And same as Templars and Tau, they're like Templars is below, they're the only army below a 10% XOX1 for the current Dataslate. So that's really bad. So I'm hoping for the Templars player that something is done in the Dataslate to sort of boost them back up until they can sort of hold them over until the new codex comes out. Overall, I think the current Dataslate wasn't too bad. It kind of got shaken up quite a bit at the end there with like multiple new codexes coming out, and you know, didn't help that there was some turbulence in the beginning there with Aeldari and Orcs, especially with Mordaka before that was quickly nerfed. But Aeldari is definitely skewing some of the top end results with the tournament wins and whatnot due to Devoted of Ynnead. But overall, I think it was a pretty good Dataslate. And if Games Workshop continues to release codexes at this rate, it is going to be kind of all over the place. But that's why you sort of look at large groups of data like 10 weeks and you can kind of get a smoother representation. All right, and we're going to look at the Army tournament wins week by week. So this shows how many tournament wins every army has over the current Dataslate, so 10 weeks, and it's broken down by each week. So each color is a different week, so you can kind of see where they get their tournament wins at. So in first place, we have Orcs with 21, Aeldari with 17, Demons with 14, Space Marines with 12, and Death Guard at 11. At the bottom, you have Templars, Agents, and Thousand Sons, all without a win. Then we have Sisters, Admech, Blood Angels, and Dark Angels, Death Watch, Grey Knights, and Tau, all with 2. So Orcs seem to have like an impossible lead to catch with like they were double everyone else. They had 20 and everyone else had 10. But Aeldari has been creeping up, getting 2 or 3 wins every week. I don't think they'll have enough time to catch them, but they're getting pretty close. Chaos Demons, another solid data slate, lots of tournament wins. You know, they lose one good detachment, they gain Shadow Legion, which is helping keeping things going. And then Space Marines, Death Guard, obviously getting a lot of their tournament wins in the last couple weeks. They got one last week, and I think they got like 4 or 5 the week before. So the new codex has definitely helped prop them up into the top 5 there. And like I mentioned before, there's still 3 armies without wins: Templars, Agents, and Thousand Sons. The only one that's kind of surprising is Thousand Sons, because they do have good results. They have really good win rate, really good XOX1 percentage. They just never found that luck to bring a tournament win home. I'm sure it'll be different next Dataslate, especially with the new codex coming out. For now, only 3 without a win is not too bad considering everything that's been going on this Dataslate. All right, and the first faction focus for the week is Aeldari. So looking at the previous 8 weeks of results, we can see that their army rep and their win percentage has been pretty steady. They've been anywhere from like 6.5 to 8% representation, anywhere from 47 to 54% win rate. So that's really good, really high representation, and an average to above average win percentage, which is good to see. So looking at their army stats versus the meta average, their win percentage is 50.4 versus the average of 48.7. Representation is almost double the meta average at 7.1 versus 3.6. And their XOX1 is a little bit above the average at 19.5 versus 16.9. And this is where they're making up a lot of ground. Their tournament wins is way above average, triple at 17 versus 5.9. So next up, we're going to look at these sub-factions and kind of see where all the players are playing and how they're getting their wins. So Devoted of Ynnead is definitely the clear favorite with a almost 45% player base. And then the next highest is the Aspect Host with 26, and everyone else is down under 10%. So now you look at the sub-faction win percentages there at the bottom. You can see Devoted of Ynnead is kind of carrying the group with a 60% win rate, and everyone else is about 50% or less. But you can clearly see that there's something going on with that detachment, and I'm sure there'll be some changes coming up in the next data slate. So I'll be curious to see how Aeldari makes out moving forward. Maybe if they nerf Devoted of Ynnead, they might boost up some other detachments to bring some life back into the ones that aren't really being played. Because if you're going to nerf one, you can't just make the army unusable. That's what happened to Sisters, and then they go a whole data slate just floundering. So that's not what you want to see. If you're going to take something away, you got to help prop up the ones that are also struggling. And then if you take a look at the sub-faction tournament wins in the bottom corner there, you can see that Devoted of Ynnead has 16 out of their 17 wins, with Warhost having 1. So again, clearly Devoted of Ynnead, it's basically the only usable detachment, and it's definitely a very busted detachment right now. While the numbers for Aeldari do look close to the average, I think a lot of that is being dragged down by the people who are playing the sort of armies like Spirit Conclave and the people playing Ghost in the Webway and stuff like that, who are playing the armies or who are playing the detachments they want to play, but not necessarily the optimal ones. It's kind of dragging that win rate down. If you look at the mass majority of the players, Devoted of Ynnead is doing 50% of the players basically, and they have such a high representation that even if you just took Devoted of Ynnead, that would almost be the meta average for representation, and you can see that to be at 60% win rate. So there's definitely something very powerful and very broken going on within that detachment. And much like armies like Orcs and Space Marines, where they have such a large player base who love specific aspects of that army, and that kind of drags the numbers down for people who aren't just taking the optimal list, because there's so many people who love Aeldari. So I do think something's going to change there, and while they do look pretty balanced, if you look at the underlying numbers, there's definitely a lot of problems going on there. I expect to see some changes in the next data slate. I just hope that they help the detachments who are not doing as good, like Aspect Host, War Host, Ghost in the Webway, those ones, and give them a little bit of love so they can sort of pick up the slack when Devoted of Ynnead inevitably gets nerfed. And the last faction focus for the week is World Eaters. So this is an army that had a codex come out a couple weeks ago, and they just wanted to see how they're doing, kind of the results versus the previous weeks, so we can see how that codex is being received. So you're looking at the previous 8 weeks there, you can see their army rep was pretty high, then it dipped down just before the codex released, and then it spiked back up again to sort of pre-codex numbers. Well, it never surpassed where it was before the codex came out. It did spike back up to the average, so I guess they didn't really gain any new players from the codex dropping. The win percentage is kind of fluctuating quite a bit, but they've been living around 46, 47%, and that's kind of where they're living at now with the new codex came out, so it's almost like nothing really happened. It gave them a couple more options, I guess, for detachments, but it didn't help them get any more wins. If you look at their stats versus the meta average, their win percentage is below the average. It's 46.9 versus 48.7. Army Representation slightly above average, 4.3 point versus 3.6. XOX1 is where they're kind of struggling quite a bit, so the average is 16.9 and they're at 12.7. And the next up is Tournament Wins, we're almost half the average at 5.9 and they're only at 3. So let's see how they kind of come to those numbers down at the Subfaction player base there. It's a little bit skewed because this Dataslate does include a lot of the index. So Berserker Warband is 73% of players, Vassals are at 13. Plenty of Khorne Daemonkin has only been a couple weeks, but they do have 7.9% of the player base already. So there's definitely a lot of players who are sort of leaning into that detachment specifically. And if you look at the bottom, the Khorne Daemonkin is only at a 45% win rate, so despite the increased amount of players over the last few weeks playing it, they're not really getting good results. Berserker Warband, 48% win rate is the highest, which is barely around the average, so that's not what you want to see. You don't want to be like Aeldari, where you have one doing 60 and everyone else doing meh, but you definitely don't want your highest detachment to be just around the average. You'd like maybe one slightly above and then everything else right around the average, and then like one or two slightly below. And looking at the tournament wins, they've got 2 from Vassals and 1 from Berserker Warband. Overall, I don't think this new codex has been well received from people. I'm seeing a lot of people complaining that there's just, not really much there. Maybe some of the World Eaters players in the comments can sort of shed some light on the subject. I'm not a World Eaters player myself, so I don't really understand the intricacies of where it might be struggling specifically. So that would be very helpful, I think, for everybody if we can get some comments in the description. So if you're a World Eaters player and you like to sort of weigh in and let me know what the sort of struggles you're facing with the new codex and how it's being received, let me know in the comments down below. I'd really appreciate that. It helps me understand a lot better. I don't think they're going to be in line for any changes this data slate. Like I said before, maybe in a couple weeks after the data slate comes out, there'll be a couple tweaks here and there. I think they kind of get these data slates done a few weeks ahead of time and they sort of sit on them and get them ready to release. So I don't think there's going to be any last minute changes. And if they do have those last minute changes, they'll be released a couple weeks later. So it might be a little bit of a rough couple month here for the World Eaters on their new codex release, but maybe they might see some changes or points changes or something to sort of help them out a little bit in the coming weeks. All right, and that's it for this week, guys. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked the video, don't forget the like button. And if you liked it, don't forget to subscribe. Again, I have the Patreon, patreon.com/warfriends. It's in the description below. Good luck in the tournaments coming up next weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.